The day aliens learned why humans were the only species still using outdated weapons. And now, respected members of the Intergalactic Defense Council, droned Council Leader Shurok, their multiple eye stalks drooping with the weariness of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. We move to Item 47B on the agenda, the annual review of military advancements by each member species. Commander Leo Hale of the human delegation slouched deeper into his seat, thinking for the 100th time that Earth probably could have sent someone with better diplomatic skills than a field officer who handled things with all the grace of a caffeinated bear. But here he was, representing humanity at what felt more like a cosmic science fair than a serious council meeting. The vast hall of Celestial Summit Station was packed with representatives from over 200 species, most of whom would spend the next few hours showcasing new ways to transform matter into energy, and then make it explode in various flashy ways. First presentation, the Xylarian Consortium, Shurok announced, somehow sounding both official and bored. Ambassador Fex of Xylaria bounded onto the platform, his shimmering scales catching the light. He adjusted his intricately designed uniform, a piece of interstellar fashion that likely cost more than Leo's entire annual salary, and gave the crowd what he must have thought was a charming smile. Instead, it looked like a reptile trying to sell you insurance. My fellow council members, Fex began in a smooth, practiced voice that oozed confidence. What if I told you we've completely transformed the idea of personal defense? Leo mouthed along to the word transformed, marking it on his mental bingo card. He'd seen enough of these pitches to know they all had a buzzword like that. Behold, Fex said, raising what looked like a sleek bracelet. The Fex Personal Defense Module, Series 7. This groundbreaking quantum-entangled shield creates a field that disperses any energy-based attack while simultaneously powering up our latest plasma weapon for an instant counterstrike. The audience murmured with interest, and Leo fought the urge to roll his eyes. Every year, it was the same. Fancy technology for more ways to shoot light at each other. They always took the opportunity to make a show of how far humanity lagged behind with its antiquated projectile weapons. But of course, Fex continued, his gaze zeroing in on the human delegation with an expression that could only be described as expertly smug. Perhaps some of our newer members would like a demonstration. He paused theatrically. Commander Hale, would you care to test our advanced shield with one of your ballistic weapons? Poorly concealed laughter rippled through the chamber, and Leo saw a Krillian ambassador 3 rows down nearly slip out of their hover seat from chuckling. Leo stood up, adjusting his uniform. He had been down this road before. Ambassador Fex, with all due respect, he began, but Fex cut him off. Oh, come now, Commander. Surely you're not afraid to show us how your species is still so charmingly fond of throwing bits of metal at high speed. I assure you, this shield can handle it. More laughter broke out. Even Shurok's eye stalks twitched in amusement. Fine, Leo sighed, pulling out his standard-issue sidearm. Safety protocols in place? Fex waved his hand dismissively. Of course. The test area is completely secure. Though I hardly think we'll need it with something so archaic. Leo aimed at the smug ambassador, who stood confidently, arms outstretched, his shield device glinting. The weight of the pistol felt oddly comforting as he steadied his hand, waiting to see just how advanced this shield really was. The weight of the pistol felt oddly comforting in Commander Leo Hale's grip, especially after hours of watching representatives fire off fancy colors of light at each other. Taking aim at Ambassador Fex's outstretched arm and his self-assured smirk, Leo couldn't help but let a slight grin slip. Ambassador, he said calmly, I should probably mention that humanity doesn't exactly consider this cutting edge. This is just standard issue, the sort of thing we give officers who spend most of their time filling out forms. With that, he pulled the trigger. What happened next was exactly as Leo expected. Fex's shield flared to life, a mesmerizing display of quantum technology, all perfectly designed to dissipate energy attacks. The bullet, however, didn't seem to care about quantum fields. It passed right through, pinging harmlessly off the containment field behind Fex, who hadn't even registered what had just happened. Leo holstered his weapon, turning to the council. And that, esteemed council members, is why humans still use projectile weapons. Not every defense can stop a piece of metal moving really fast. For a moment, the entire chamber went silent. Just 3 full seconds of stunned quiet before the place erupted into chaos. Tentacles waved, wings fluttered, and several members scrambled for their datapads, demanding explanations. Fex, meanwhile, was frozen in place, looking like someone who'd just realized they'd been scammed. Leo settled back into his seat, pulling out his datapad and marking off chaos erupts during demonstration on his galactic bingo card. Some days he truly loved this job. Council leader Shurok was still trying to calm the commotion when Professor Orca, a blob-like xenoarchaeologist, burst into the chamber, their gelatinous form wobbling in a way that could mean anything from panic to uncontainable excitement. With amorphous species like orcas, you could never be quite sure. "Stop. Everyone stop." Orca's translator screeched, the pitch rising with each word. "You're all in grave danger." If anything, the level of chaos actually managed to increase. Shurok's eye stalks twisted into what looked like a quantum-level knot, and at least 3 members of the council fell out of their seats. "Professor Orca," Shurok called out, trying to untangle himself, "this is a closed session. How did you even get in here?" Orca waved the question aside, either not hearing or choosing to ignore it. Their translucent form had taken on a pale, worried shade. The ancients, the ones who disappeared, they weren't wiped out by a natural disaster. They were invaded. That declaration cut through the chaos. Everyone fell silent, even Fex, who was still trying to recover from his very public embarrassment. "The precursors?" someone asked. "The civilization that vanished over 50,000 years ago." "Yes," Orca oozed up to the center platform, leaving a faint trail of what seemed to be gel from anxiety-induced sweating. "My team just finished decoding warnings in the ruins on Epsilon 6. They left messages about their attackers. Messages we've been translating wrong for centuries. What we thought were religious symbols are actually technical specifications." Orca's surface rippled with excitement as they activated the chamber's holographic display, and a series of ancient symbols floated in the air, slowly rotating. "This isn't a prayer," Orca announced. "It's a warning. And it mentions something terrifying. Kinetic penetrators." Leo's curiosity piqued, and he sat up a little straighter. That term had an all-too-familiar ring to it, a trigger for every ounce of his tactical training. "The precursors had energy shields too," Orca continued, their translator barely keeping up with their enthusiasm. "Shields more advanced than anything we've developed so far. But these invaders, they used weapons that simply ignored all of it. Dense projectiles fired at high speeds." Ambassador Fex's confident demeanor faltered as he glanced down at his still-smoking shield device. His scales shifted to a distinctly queasy shade of green. "Are you saying primitive projectile weapons like the one that just pierced my impenetrable shield?" "Exactly." Professor Orca's form quivered with excitement, nearly vibrating. The precursors became so reliant on energy-based weaponry and defenses that, when faced with attackers wielding physical projectiles, they were completely helpless. The council chamber erupted in anxious whispers, and Leo noticed a few representatives shooting wary glances his way. Finally, a voice broke through the murmurs. "Hold on," shouted a representative from the Zalari delegation, clearly skeptical. "Are we supposed to believe that one of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations was defeated by, what? Throwing rocks? Really fast?" Actually, Leo found himself standing, the focus of hundreds of alien eyes on him. It's quite effective. Energy shields work well against energy-based attacks, but mass is mass. If something dense enough is moving fast enough, it doesn't matter how advanced your shield tech is. "Thank you, Commander Hale," Shurok interjected, clearly trying to regain control. "But I still..." They were interrupted by Lieutenant Mara Rios bursting into the chamber, looking like she'd sprinted across the entire station. "Commander Hale," she managed between breaths. "Long-range sensors have picked up an unknown fleet entering the galaxy. They're ignoring all standard communication attempts, and their ships don't match any configuration in our records." Leo exchanged a look with Professor Orca, whose holographic display of ancient symbols was still spinning in the air. "Let me guess," he said dryly. "Their ships are unusually dense and give off minimal energy signatures." Rios blinked in surprise. "Yes, sir. How did you—" "Just a hunch," he replied, turning back to the council. "Counselor Shurak, I'd suggest we move straight to emergency protocols. And Professor Orca might want to stick around. I suspect we'll need an archaeologist's perspective on this one." Ambassador Fex's scales shifted to a shade best described as alarmed. "For once I agree with the human," he muttered. Leo gave a grim smile. "Looks like we're about to get a live demonstration of why humanity never abandoned projectile weapons. Lieutenant Rios, notify the armory. I want every railgun ready for use." A grin spread across Rios's face, like a kid who'd been given the keys to the candy store. "All of them, sir?" "All of them, Lieutenant. Something tells me we're going to need a lot of things moving very fast in one direction." As the chamber dissolved into renewed chaos, Leo couldn't help but glance at his datapad. Ancient civilization destroyed by mysterious invaders hadn't been on his bingo card. He'd have to make a note to add it for next year's summit, assuming, of course, there was one. Professor Orca had been obsessively comparing the unknown fleet's design to ancient records, their gelatinous form wobbling with enthusiasm. "The resemblance to precursor technology is remarkable," Orca said. "The mass readings, the minimal energy signatures, even the way they're positioning themselves just outside our effective weapon range. It's uncanny." About that, Lieutenant Rios cut in, her trigger finger practically itching from hours of restraint. "I've done some calculations, and while their ships are outside the range of our energy weapons, they're well within range for our latest railgun designs." Ambassador Fex's scales flashed crimson. "We are not going to start an interstellar incident by firing, what was it, primitive projectiles at a completely unknown civilization. Even if they're the same civilization that might have obliterated the precursors?" Leo asked calmly. Shurak's eye stalks narrowed. "We don't know that for certain," they said, tentacles wrapped tightly around yet another cup of stimulant juice. "And even if it is them, that was 50,000 years ago. Perhaps they've evolved beyond violence." As if on cue, the chamber's main display blinked with an incoming transmission from the mysterious fleet. But instead of a message, the ships began to move. "Well," Leo muttered, "it looks like we're about to find out." The alien fleet's movement was strange, almost unnervingly precise. Instead of conventional propulsion, the ships seemed to fall in specific directions, using gravity itself as their primary means of propulsion, an elegant yet terrifying maneuver. "They're charging weapons," Rios announced, her tactical display lighting up like a holiday tree under attack. "But the energy readings are— wait, that can't be right." Leo squinted at the display. "Let me guess, no energy readings at all?" Rios's face lit up with understanding. "Exactly. It's like they're not." "Oh." Her eyes widened in realization. "They're using kinetic weapons. Really, really big kinetic weapons." The first shot from the alien fleet confirmed her theory. A massive hunk of refined metal, roughly the size of an office building, hurtled through space at a terrifying fraction of light speed. It smashed through 3 layers of the galaxy's most advanced energy shields as if they were paper, ultimately obliterating an uninhabited monitoring station into excited atoms. The council chamber exploded in pure panic. Shurak's tentacles twisted themselves into what might have been a quantum-level knot, and Fex's scales cycled through so many colors they ended up displaying hues not typically visible to the naked eye. Orca, meanwhile, was practically bouncing with inappropriate academic excitement. This is extraordinary. The historical significance alone. Orca paused as if suddenly remembering they were, in fact, under attack. We're all going to die, but the implications... We're not going to die, Leo said, his voice a beacon of calm in the chaos. Lieutenant Rios, remember those railgun calculations you mentioned? Rios's grin spread across her face, menacingly enthusiastic. Yes, sir. I took the liberty of having the crew load our experimental super heavy penetrators. They're not quite as fast as the alien rounds, but with the new magnetic coils. Lieutenant, Leo interrupted with a faint smile, less talking, more shooting. Yes, sir. The next few minutes were educational for everyone involved. The alien fleet, apparently expecting their opponents to be as helpless as the precursors had been, had organized themselves in a perfect, textbook attack formation. The alien fleet's perfect attack formation might have been ideal for fending off energy weapons, but against the barrage of high-speed tungsten rods that Rios was now enthusiastically unleashing, it was far less effective. The aliens' return fire was devastating, yes, but predictable. It became obvious they hadn't faced an enemy with equivalent firepower in an extremely long time. Their shots were powerful, precise, and entirely useless when their targets simply weren't where they were aiming. Ha! Rios's triumphant shout filled the chamber as another alien ship punctured with a perfectly round tungsten hole. That's what you get for bringing last millennium's tactics to a kinetic fight. Who's primitive now? Leo shot her a look half amused, half admonishing. Lieutenant, kindly maintain professional decorum while committing acts of extreme violence. Rio straightened, giving a mock salute. Yes, sir. Target neutralized with extreme prejudice, sir. The alien fleet, apparently deciding this was not how today's battle was supposed to go, began a rapid retreat. Their ships disappeared into gravity wells with the same eerie grace they had arrived with, leaving behind a smattering of disabled vessels and a sea of stunned Galactic Council representatives. Shurok, untangling their tentacles, addressed the chamber. Well, I believe this emergency session has indeed been informative. Ambassador Fex, his scales settling into a shade best described as embarrassed acceptance, managed a tight nod. Perhaps we should revisit our earlier discussions on the relative merits of different weapons technologies. Fantastic idea, Leo replied, watching as Rios gave the tactical display a satisfied pat. But maybe we should also think about what we're going to do when they come back. Because believe me, they will. Shurok fixed him with a curious look. What makes you so certain, Commander? Leo smiled grimly. If there's one thing humans understand, it's the psychology of people who show up expecting an easy fight. When they don't get it, they tend to take it personally. Fex's scales shifted to a pale, worried shade. How long do you think we have? Rios, still glowing from her recent victory, interjected eagerly. Long enough to start mass-producing railguns? Leo sighed. Lieutenant, sorry, sir. Long enough to begin a measured and appropriate military response to a clear and present danger, sir. Leo rubbed his temples. It was going to be a long week, but on the plus side, he'd finally filled out his bingo card. The emergency rearmament session that followed was, unsurprisingly, a disaster of galactic proportions. Trying to overhaul the entire Defense Council's military doctrine in under a day resulted in pure chaos. Arguments flew left and right. What do you mean you can't just add guns to everything? Fex demanded, waving a technical diagram that might have been a weapon design, or possibly an irritated coffee maker. Leo pinched the bridge of his nose. No, that's not. Look, you can't just strap a railgun onto every ship and expect it to work. The recoil alone would tear them apart. You have to design the whole ship to handle that force. The Zenten representative's translator nearly shorted out from disbelief. Recoil? Weapons are not supposed to push back. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Rios chimed in cheerfully, still buzzing from the adrenaline of battle. Basic physics. Sir Isaac Newton is the deadliest son of a lieutenant, Leo warned, though a smile crept onto his face. Apologies, sir. She cleared her throat, though the gleam in her eye was undiminished. Sir Isaac Newton is the deadliest son of a gun in space, sir. Vex's tentacles twitched nervously. Are you suggesting we need to completely redesign our entire fleet? That's impossible. The cost alone is less than the cost of extinction, Orca interjected, their gelatinous forms surrounded by hovering ancient records. The precursor records are clear. Once these invaders find a weak spot, they don't stop until nothing remains. But our energy weapons, Vex began looking uncertain, they're visually stunning displays of light, which their shields completely ignore, Leo finished. Look, humanity wrestled with this same issue centuries ago. Sure, energy weapons are clean, efficient, elegant, but sometimes you just need to throw a really dense object really fast at something you really don't like. That's barbaric, a voice protested from the back. No, Leo corrected, that's physics. And physics doesn't care about elegance. It cares about mass and acceleration. Rios, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly perked up, her eyes glinting. Sir, I have an idea. The entire chamber held its collective breath. Rios's ideas were typically effective and typically explosive. We can't rebuild the entire fleet in time, she admitted. But what if we didn't have to? What if we just built really big guns and put them on stationary space platforms? Like coastal defense batteries on Earth, but for solar systems. The chamber went silent. Even Vex's tentacles paused mid-twitch. That's, Leo started, realization dawning. Brilliant. Brilliant. Orca echoed, their form rippling with excitement. The precursors never tried fixed positions. Their whole defense was based on mobile energy weapons. Fixed kinetic platforms would be completely outside the invader's tactical experience. Vex's scales shifted to a greenish shade, signaling his brain was actually engaging. They'd be expecting us to fight like the precursors did. Exactly. Rios was practically vibrating with excitement. We build a network of fixed defense platforms, big ones with massive guns. They'll be expecting mobile ships with energy weapons, not stationary fortresses that hurl chunks of metal at incredible speeds. Vex tentatively unwound one of their tentacles. But the engineering requirements would be colossal. The power to accelerate such massive projectiles. Already solved, Leo said, pulling up files on his datapad. Humanity's been working on theoretical designs for system defense platforms for centuries. We never built them because, well, everyone insisted kinetic weapons were primitive. Vex's scales flushed with embarrassment. I don't suppose you'd be willing to share those designs? Leo's smile was, in a word, ominous. Of course. That's what allies are for. Though I should warn you, Lieutenant Rios here will probably want to be involved in the construction process. Rios's grin stretched dangerously wide. Imagine the possibilities. Layered fields of fire, interlocking kill zones, synchronized barrage patterns. It'll be beautiful. Leo coughed. Lieutenant. Sorry, sir. Rios straightened, barely containing her enthusiasm. It will be a professionally executed defensive strategy with multiple, redundant layers of protection, sir. Vex's tentacles twisted back into a calm, strategic position. It was clear they were on board, though probably bracing for the chaos ahead. Vex's tentacles twisted in what could only be interpreted as a cosmic headache. I'll convene an emergency funding session. Professor Orca, we'll need your historical data to justify the expense. Ambassador Vex, can your people handle the manufacturing if we supply the designs? The Velian Confederation would be honored to demonstrate our manufacturing capabilities in support of this innovative defensive approach, Vex replied, his tone almost sounding like he had rehearsed it. Good, Leo nodded, because they will come back, and next time, they'll be prepared for mobile railgun platforms. But stationary defenses? That's going to be a rather unpleasant surprise. Vex looked over at the tactical display, still showing the alien fleet's retreat. How long do you think we have? Long enough to build something interesting, Leo replied. He glanced at Rios, who looked as if every major holiday had arrived at once. Lieutenant, I believe you have some designs ready to share? Oh, yes, sir. I have so many ideas, Rios grinned, practically vibrating with excitement. Fex's scales shifted to a deep, anxious purple. That's exactly what concerns me. Relax, Leo assured him with a faint smirk. This plan is probably going to work. And if it doesn't, he paused, contemplating. Well, the explosions will be spectacular at least. That's not particularly reassuring. Wasn't meant to be, Leo replied. Now let's get to work on some very big guns. 3 months of intense, round-the-clock construction later, Leo stood in the command center of New Geneva Station, watching the defensive grid spring to life. The massive network of kinetic platforms formed a coordinated ballet of potential destruction, each platform tracking its assigned sectors with precise, deadly grace. It's beautiful, Rios whispered, wiping away what might have been a tear. Like a symphony of synchronized devastation. Lieutenant, Leo said with a smile. Sorry, sir. I meant a professionally coordinated network of defensive installations, sir. Fex, whose scales had been stuck in a nervous blue hue for days, scanned his display for the 100th time. Are we sure they're coming back? Maybe they've decided we aren't worth the trouble. As if on cue, the long-range sensors lit up like a star suffering an identity crisis. Leo sighed. You had to ask. Professor Orca's gelatinous form rippled with excitement. The formation matches the precursor records exactly. They're using the same attack pattern that worked 50,000 years ago. How unfortunate for them, Rios grinned. Shall I begin targeting calculations, sir? Not yet, Lieutenant, Leo said. Let's see if they've learned anything from the last encounter. He turned to Vex, who looked like an animated probability diagram. Counselor, should we try to open communications? Protocol suggests, Vex started, but was interrupted as the nearest display screen lit up with what looked suspiciously like a mathematical proof that, if possible, was hurling expletives. Well, Vex muttered, his scales settling into a resigned yellow, I suppose that answers that. Indeed, Leo nodded. Lieutenant, let's show them why humans have a saying about bringing knives to gunfights. What followed was perhaps the most one-sided space battle in galactic history. The alien fleet, still using tactics that hadn't evolved since before most species discovered fire, flew directly into the meticulously planned kill zone. The alien fleet advanced with all the grace of a clumsy penguin stumbling into a formal dinner. The first salvo from the defense platforms reduced 3 of their largest ships to rapidly expanding clouds of shocked atoms. The second salvo found them scrambling to reorient, only to obliterate the entire center of their fleet. By the third, it was clear they were having serious second thoughts about this invasion. Rios's triumphant cry filled the command center. That's what you get for sticking with 50,000-year-old tactics. How do you like our primitive weapons now? Lieutenant, Leo said in a warning tone. Apologies, sir, she replied, barely able to contain her grin. The enemy is experiencing rapid unplanned disassembly due to superior defensive preparations, sir. The alien fleet's response devolved into pure chaos. The remaining ships scattered in all directions, abandoning any semblance of coordination. A few tried to fire back, but their targeting systems, clearly designed for battling energy weapon platforms, were useless against the fixed defense stations, which had all the subtlety of a brick hurled at high speed. They're retreating again, Fex observed, his scales now a mix of relief and a hint of smug satisfaction. And much faster this time. Of course they are, Orca wobbled excitedly. They've just faced something completely outside their tactical experience. No one's fought back like this in 50,000 years. Leo shrugged. Everyone got so focused on advancing that they forgot old tactics can work just as well. Speaking of old tactics, Rios chimed in, still grinning like someone who'd just won the lottery. Several of their disabled ships look intact enough to study. Should we send in recovery teams? Absolutely not. Vex's tentacles somehow managed a stern twist. Protocol for first contact situations clearly states that we must carefully study all potential threats before recovery missions. Leo nodded, trying to keep a straight face. Besides, I think Lieutenant Rios here might explode if we didn't let her take a closer look at those ships. I would not, Rios protested, then hesitated. Though I might have to resign for unrelated reasons. See? Leo smirked. We can't have that. Think of the paperwork. Vex's tentacles did something that in any other species would have resembled an eye roll. Fine. But I want it noted that I strongly objected to this blatant violation of first contact protocols. Noted, Leo agreed. Now let's see what kind of tech our new friends left behind. Lieutenant, try to contain your enthusiasm. Rios, practically vibrating with excitement, managed a mock-serious salute. Yes, sir. I will maintain absolute decorum while examining these fascinating alien systems. And if something happens to explode, it will be strictly for research purposes. Leo chuckled. Not exactly reassuring. Wasn't meant to be, sir. Rios replied, grinning. Leo sighed. It was going to be one interesting debrief, but at least they'd proven exactly why humans never abandoned the joy of hurling fast-moving objects at their problems. Sometimes, the old ways really were the best. And with any luck, the aliens might come back. After all, they still had plenty of new gun designs, just waiting to be tested. The post-victory session of the Defense Council had a noticeably more relaxed tone, though keeping diplomatic decorum was a challenge after watching 50,000 years of tactical superiority be obliterated by what the galaxy had written off as outdated weaponry. To summarize our preliminary findings, announced Ambassador Fex, his scales flashing a mix of smugness and embarrassment, our analysis of the disabled alien ships confirms Professor Orca's translations. These invaders are indeed the same species that destroyed the precursors. Were, Lieutenant Rios muttered under her breath, earning a sharp look from Leo. Fex continued, cautiously avoiding the human delegation's gaze. Their entire civilization appears to have evolved solely along kinetic lines, without the development of energy weapons. Their shields, as it turns out, were specifically designed to counter the energy-based technology of the precursors, which explains why they were entirely ineffective against our primitive defenses. You mean why they got their shiny metal hides handed to them by kinetic weapons? Rios whispered gleefully. This time, Leo didn't even bother to give her the look. Vex's tentacles had finally untwisted, forming a contemplative, if slightly exhausted, shape. The diplomatic implications are concerning. We now have confirmation of a hostile elder species that could return, perhaps with updated tactics. Oh, they'll definitely be back, Leo nodded. But next time, they'll be prepared for kinetic weapons. He turned to Rios, which is why Lieutenant Rios here has been working on some interesting new designs. Rios's grin broadened, practically requiring a warning label. Since you asked, she pulled up a holographic display that looked like someone had given a hyperactive engineer free rein to design a miniature Death Star. I call it the Mark II Defense Grid. We take the existing platforms and add rotating magnetic acceleration coils that allow. Leo let the technical explanation wash over him, watching the council members' expressions shift between horror and fascination. Fex's scales seemed genuinely uncertain which color to settle on. Finally, Rios finished her 20-minute presentation. In conclusion, by combining classic human kinetic weapon designs with Velian manufacturing techniques and Zentan power systems, we can create a defensive network capable of firing significantly larger projectiles at dramatically higher velocities with extreme precision. By significantly, the lieutenant means enough to, well, potentially violate a few laws of physics. Leo translated, then added with a smirk, though I'm still not sold on the rotating sections. Rios gave a respectful nod. The rotation adds style, sir. Lieutenant. Apologies, sir. The rotation allows enhanced tactical flexibility through multiple overlapping fields of fire, Sir. Professor Orca, who had been uncharacteristically silent, rippled with excitement. This is remarkable. We're witnessing the emergence of an entirely new school of military doctrine. The integration of what was dismissed as primitive technology with cutting-edge engineering will be studied by future historians for centuries. Assuming we live long enough to have future historians, Vex noted dryly. The cost of implementing this across all member systems is less than the cost of extinction, Vex finished, his scales settling on a determined shade of blue. The Velian Confederation pledges its full industrial capacity to support this project. Leo smiled, tipping his head toward Rios. The galaxy's most unexpected defense doctrine was taking shape, and with it, a new era of interstellar cooperation, with just a dash of human-inspired chaos. One by one, the other representatives quickly pledged their support, perhaps less out of genuine enthusiasm and more out of the practical fear of being the only ones without massive gun platforms when the aliens inevitably returned. Leo chuckled, surveying the newfound alliance with a satisfied grin. Well then, he said, it looks like humanity has officially entered the galactic weapons consulting business. He turned to Rios, who was practically levitating with excitement. Lieutenant, please try to keep your enthusiasm at a professional level. Rios managed a wobbly salute, her grin barely restrained. Yes, sir. I will maintain appropriate decor while revolutionizing the galaxy's entire approach to defensive technology. Though I can't promise there won't be a few explosions. With you, Lieutenant, there are always explosions. Thank you, sir. I do try. Vex's tentacles twisted into yet another knot, likely signaling an incoming migraine. I suppose this means next year's defense summit will be interesting. Oh, I'd count on it, Leo replied, watching Rios enthusiastically outline plans involving tungsten rods and magnetic accelerators to an increasingly wide-eyed Ambassador Vex. In fact, we might want to update the bingo cards. I get the feeling ancient hostile species returns and galaxy-wide military doctrine overhaul are going to become common squares. That's not particularly comforting. Wasn't meant to be, Leo said with a wry smile. Now, who wants to see Lieutenant Rios's latest idea for something she's calling the super-heavy antimatter-assisted kinetic kill vehicle? I'm told it even includes a practical demonstration. The resulting chaos in the chamber was, Leo had to admit, spectacularly entertaining. Almost as spectacular as the look on Vex's face when Rios launched into the theory behind nuclear pulse propulsion. Some days, Leo really did love his job. Meanwhile, somewhere in the vast darkness of space, the defeated alien fleet was likely engaged in some interesting discussions of their own. No doubt they were beginning to realize the danger in underestimating primitive technology. Leo almost felt a pang of sympathy for them. Almost. After all, they really should have known better. There was a reason why humans were the one species that had never abandoned the simple, timeless joy of throwing things really, really fast at whatever problems they couldn't solve otherwise. Sometimes, the old ways truly were the best, especially when those old ways involved railguns.